Hello, hello. Hi. Oh, it's just me at first. Laurel will be out in a minute, but thank you all so much for being here. It's such a joy to be with you, and I want to start today by welcoming a very special guest who wants to say hello. It's Henry Ryder from Sierra Leone.
Hello, everyone. Actually, I'm so grateful, really. The reason why I'm happy to share my story is that it motivates people. And all thanks to my mom, Mrs. Asatu Rida. She has a YouTube channel too. She's so amazing. She was there for me when I am in the hospital. Guys, she is so perfect. The reason why my goal is to achieve 100,000 subscribers is to inspire others, because hope starts by motivating others. Guys, subscribe on my YouTube channel, and don't forget to subscribe on my mom channel, because she was there for me as a two leader. I love you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Henry's a good YouTuber. He reminds you to subscribe every time he talks. That's just YouTube 101 right there. But, you know, Henry was saying how much he loves his mother and how perfect she is, and it really is because of Henry's mother, Isatu, that Henry was able to survive drug-resistant tuberculosis and be here with us today, and I'm so grateful that he is, and so grateful that all y'all are here with me today. This is a remarkable room, and I'm really grateful to be here. It's been a while since I've been behind the podium at a church, but at least I'm not up there. I'm really glad to be here with you tonight, and I will be doing some preaching later, full disclosure. But, you know, if they give you a pulpit, you got to take advantage of it, I think. If you have a spare seat beside you, go ahead and raise your hand if you can scrunch together a little bit. So scrunch together a little bit and make those aisles available, because there are some folks who are still looking for seats. You're so kind at scrunching, my friends. And there's some seats in the second row as well if anybody needs a seat down there. Thank you so much. Okay, y'all are the best. So I really wanted you to meet Henry because this is a book about tuberculosis, but it's also a book about one person who you just heard on the phone, and it's the story of Henry's keep those hands up for folks who are looking for seats. It's the story of Henry's desperate attempts to survive tuberculosis, a disease. I think we're good now. I think everybody's good. Oh, no. I think that might be one of my real-life friends, actually. I have some real-life friends here. Thanks to all my real-life friends who are here. Also, thanks to everybody from the CDC who's here, everybody who works on tuberculosis in real life. We love you, and we know it's a hard time. So thank you for being here with us tonight. Before I read a little bit of the book, just so you can plausibly say you attended a book reading, I want to thank you for doing the heroic work of getting out of bed and making yourself go outside. It's hard, especially right now, and yet here we are, finding ways to go on and perhaps finding meaning and community along the way, which is what I hope tonight will be for you, an opportunity to reflect in community on the world we've built and the worlds we might build instead. So now I'm going to read from the book, but I don't have a copy of the book, so I'm going to borrow one from this person who has the Taylor Swift John shirt. It is a great blessing to be without a book in a room full of 1,200 of them. This is about the first time I visited Laka Government Hospital in Sierra Leone, which is the only tuberculosis hospital in the country. It should have more TB hospitals, but the healthcare system is extraordinarily underfunded, and so it doesn't. But this is about the first time I visited Laka. When we arrived at Laka, we were immediately greeted by a child who introduced himself as Henry. "That's my son's name," I told him, and he smiled. Most Sierra Leoneans are multilingual, but Henry spoke particularly good English, especially for a kid his age, which made it possible for us to have a conversation that could go beyond my few halting phrases of Creole. I asked him how he was doing, and he said, "I am happy, sir. I am encouraged." He loved that word, and who wouldn't? encouraged, like courage is something we rouse ourselves and others into. My son Henry was 9 then, and this Henry looked about the same age, a small boy with spindly legs and a big, goofy smile. He wore shorts and an oversized rugby shirt that reached nearly to his knees. Henry took hold of my t-shirt and began walking me around the hospital. He showed me the lab where a technician was looking through a microscope, and Henry looked through the microscope and then asked me to, as the lab tech, a young woman from Freetown, explained that this sample contained tuberculosis even though the patient had been treated for several months with standard therapy. The lab tech began to explain standard therapy to me, but Henry was pulling on my shirt again. He walked me through the wards, a complex of poorly ventilated buildings that contained hospital rooms with barred windows, thin mattresses, and no toilets. There was no electricity in the wards and no consistent running water. To me, the rooms resembled prison cells. Before it was a TB hospital, LaCa was a leprosy isolation facility, and it felt like one. Inside each room, 1 or 2 patients lay on cots, generally on their side or back. A few sat on the edges of their beds, leaning forward, and all these men, the women were in a separate ward, were thin. Some were so emaciated that their skin seemed wrapped tightly around bone. As we walked down a hallway between buildings, Henry and I watched a young man drink water from a plastic bottle and then promptly vomit a mix of bile and blood. I instinctively turned away, but Henry continued to stare at the man. I figured Henry was someone's kid, a doctor maybe, or a nurse, or one of the cooking or cleaning staff. Everyone seemed to know him, and everyone stopped their work to say hello and rub his head or squeeze his hand. I was immediately charmed by Henry. He had some of the same mannerisms of my son, the same paradoxical mixture of shyness and enthusiastic desire for connection. Henry eventually brought me back to the group of doctors and nurses who were meeting in a small room near the entrance to the hospital, and then one of the nurses lovingly and laughingly shooed him away. "Who is that kid?" I asked. "Henry," answered a nurse, "the sweetest boy." "He's one of the patients we're worried about," said a physician who went by Dr. Michael. "He's a patient?" I asked. "Yes." "He's such a cute little kid," I said. "I hope he's going to be okay." Dr. Michael told me that Henry wasn't a little kid. He was 17. He was only so small because he'd grown up malnourished, and then the TB had further emaciated his body. "He seems to be doing okay," I said. "Lots of energy. He walked me all around the hospital." "This is because the antibiotics are working," Dr. Michael explained. "But we know they are not working well enough. We are almost certain they will fail, and that's a big problem." He shrugged, tight-lipped. There was a lot I didn't understand. Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you again for being here tonight. It is now my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome one of my personal infectious disease heroes, Laurel Bristow. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. I'm so happy to be here.
This is exciting. This is my first book tour.
Yeah. You're doing really well so far.
Thank you. I was planning to open with a bit because it's like a conversation about a book to be like, how did you pick your font? But you actually really
I wrote about how I picked my font.
Explain explicitly how you picked that font.
I do, yeah. So there's a section of the book on the copyright page where sometimes they'll be like, this book is laid out in this font, and it was designed in 1742 or whatever. But there's this font I love called Bembo. It's my favorite font by a very wide margin. It was designed by Cardinal. It was the first book ever laid out in Bembo. It was written by this guy, Pietro Bembo. And he wrote a book about Mount Etna. And in the book, he writes, where did these fires come from? And once they started burning, why do they continue? Which I think is the most beautiful statement about tuberculosis ever made. And so I wanted the book to be laid out in Bembo, and my designer was like, yeah, whatever, man, that's fine.
So, first question, check, answered. I want to start by something I'm sure you'll love, which is lavishing you with praise in front of a bunch of people while maintaining eye contact. But I have to thank you for this book. I was lucky enough to get an advance copy, so I have read it thoroughly. And I have to admit, I was a little bit embarrassed when I first started reading this book for two reasons. One, I think for people who work in infectious disease, depending on what capacity you work in, you sometimes can be removed from the human experience and the patient experience. You look at disease like a fun puzzle to solve, or look at how weird this interaction is in the body, and you really ground the impact of the disease in the human experience with Henry in just such a beautiful way. And I also really appreciated it because I think as a science communicator, I realize that I do sometimes fall back on the sort of crutch that is, it takes so much work to try to explain to people why they should care about something that doesn't directly affect them, that sometimes you lean on, okay, well, this doesn't affect you now, but here's why you should care about it, because it could affect you. And this book is very solidly pulls you into, no, we're going to care about this because it affects people right now. And I think that it's done so well. It feels like, do you remember the 2017 article that is continuously reposted now that's titled, "I don't know how to explain to you that you should care about other people"? This book feels like the answer to that. This is how you explain to someone that they should care about other people. So I really appreciate it.
That's very kind. Thank you.
But you got by TB. We have a lot of TB researchers in the audience that I know, and the joke is that once you start working on TB, it just calls you back, it pulls you back. It happened to me. I worked on TB in San Francisco, and then 5 years later, I worked on TB again at Emory. It's kind of this siren song. So I was just really interested in, you talk in the book about how you didn't even really want to go visit the hospital. You got drawn into it. You were in Sierra Leone for another reason. But then you went and you met Henry, and you've maintained this relationship with him and written this whole book about TB. And, you meet a lot of people. You learn a lot of things. You were there for maternal mortality, but you didn't write a whole book on maternal mortality. Can you talk to us about what it was from that experience that just got into your brain that made you keep thinking about TB and maintain this long-distance relationship with Henry?
Well, I think I certainly could have written a book about maternal mortality, which is also a problem of injustice, or a book about malaria or HIV or typhoid or cholera. I mean, there are so many diseases of injustice. Cancer is a disease of injustice. Diabetes is a disease of injustice. If you put a map of poverty in my hometown of Indianapolis and then you put a map of cancer rates on top of it, it's the same map. And so it's not that tuberculosis is the only disease of injustice, but for me, it's the exemplary disease of injustice because it strikes, it follows the paths that we blazed for it. And so where there is inequity in our social orders, there will be tuberculosis. When we see tuberculosis today, we almost always see it in the lives of people who are left out by the systems that we've built in order to provide health care, to provide other services. It's almost always the people who are intentionally, in many cases, left out by those systems who are most likely to get tuberculosis. Now, any of us can get tuberculosis, of course. It's an airborne disease. Tuberculosis anywhere is a threat to people everywhere. You're absolutely right that this isn't a problem here in the United States today, but it is a problem. I mean, we have 10,000 cases of TB a year, and it's becoming a bigger problem in the last few years. But it's not the size of the problem it is in Sierra Leone or India or Pakistan or Indonesia or the Philippines. But even in middle-income countries like India or South Africa or Kenya, tuberculosis is still striking the people primarily who are most marginalized, most left out by our systems. And that's what fascinated me. The bacteria is interesting, right? But what's really interesting is the human-built systems that have failed, that have allowed over 150 million people to die of TB since it became curable.
One very large theme of this book is about, the importance of eliminating TB, and a big portion of that is funding. And of course, at this particular moment, that's more important than ever with the USAID cuts. How has that impacted? I would imagine that when you, even when you announced that this tour was happening, you did not expect that the situation would be quite so dire.
No, Laurel, I would give anything for this book to be a little less timely.
Yeah.
It's been very inconvenient for me to have it be so timely, but also catastrophic for overall human health.
Yeah.
So I think of the story of tuberculosis as a long staircase, right? Like 2,100 years ago, Hippocrates told his students, don't even try to treat tuberculosis because it'll make you look like a bad healer, because it's totally impossible to do anything about it, right? And then we've slowly walked up that staircase. We walked up that staircase a little bit in ancient China and ancient India when they figured out that tuberculosis was almost definitely contagious and took some infection control measures. We walked up the staircase dramatically starting in 1882 when we figured out that tuberculosis was definitely an infectious disease and identified the causative agent of that infectious disease, this little bacteria called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. We walked up the staircase more with a vaccine that unfortunately isn't very effective except in preventing severe illness and death in children. But we walked up we walked it up a little more with chest x-rays, with better diagnostic tools. We walked up it again with a curative treatment in the form of antibiotics given over 4 or 6 months. And we kept walking up the staircase. And then in the last 8 weeks, I want to be very clear, we didn't like take a couple steps down the staircase, we fell down the staircase. It's catastrophic what's happening. According to the New York Times, hundreds of thousands of people have seen their treatment interrupted in the middle of their pills, which is it's hard to overstate how serious that is. Even 2 weeks of going without your medication leads to a skyrocketing risk of drug resistance. And that's a tragedy for that individual. They're now very likely to die. Most of the people who see their treatment interrupted are going to die, ultimately, of tuberculosis. And that's a decision that was made by the US government. But also, I think even more devastatingly, or just as devastatingly, that means more complicated drug resistance circulating in communities, which is a catastrophe for entire social orders, including this one. And so it's really important. I mean, the reason the tour was going to be about one thing, and now it's about something else. And what it's about now is trying to claw back whatever we can when it comes to responding to diseases of injustice. The United States has long been the most generous funder of tuberculosis response, and I agree with a lot of people who are concerned about the fact that the U.S. is overwhelmingly, leading this response. At the same time, it's less than 1/2 of 1 cent of your tax dollar. And it's done an unfathomable amount of good in the world. And to see that rolled back, especially in this chaotic way, and see the machinery of TB distribution of diagnostics and tools just freeze has been absolutely horrifying and frankly pretty terrifying.
Yeah, and it just feels like it's really indicative of the way that problems that aren't in this country aren't viewed as legitimate, because the point has been brought up. If we were to decide that, Medicare needed an overhaul or there was a question with it, you wouldn't just stop everybody's health insurance and their health treatments right away to figure that out. You would figure it out while people were still maintaining access to treatment. And that's simply not being done right now. And I'm wondering, you seem like the kind of guy who spends a lot of time thinking.
It's true.
Do you have, your own thoughts or theories about why this is happening? I mean, when you're so deep in public health and infectious disease, it's like, well, how could you ever justify, do you think it really is the case that, the idea is like, oh, well, that's an over there problem and it won't come here?
I think there's an element of that's an over there problem, but of course, diseases don't know about political borders, and if we're going to talk about pandemic preparedness, we need to grapple with the fact that there are several ongoing pandemics that we need to prepare for, and one of them is a TB pandemic. And as we have more complicated drug resistance emerging in communities, we may eventually have a version of tuberculosis that we simply have no tools to fight. That's largely because between 1965 and 2012, we didn't develop any new drugs to treat tuberculosis, and so we're just way far behind the curve when it comes to powerful new tools. But yeah, I mean, that should scare us, frankly.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about it in your book, there are new vaccine candidates that are coming up.
Yeah, there's a lot of that's encouraging.
But, I mean, not to bring this back down real quick, but...
Oh. Dang it, Laurel, I thought we were on the up.
But, you have to do clinical trials for vaccine efficacy or for antibiotic efficacy in populations that have TB. We don't have the population here, and when you defund these clinics, then you don't have the staff, you don't have the ability to do these clinical trials, which means progress. Even if we have things that could, completely change the face of TB, we will not know if they work or not. They're just sitting there.
Yeah, that's a hugely important point. We were about to start a trial for a really game-changing tongue swab test that could identify tuberculosis almost like the way you identify strep throat, and it would be cheap and potentially really accurate. It might even be a better test for some populations that are left out by our current tests, and we don't know that because that contract got canceled. We're pretty far down the line with a tuberculosis vaccine that we hope will be better than our current vaccine that isn't good and is 102 years old. But and that is mostly funded by private money and so should survive. But yeah, I mean, we have spent so much money that we aren't seeing the good that can be done from it. So whether that's TB drugs that we already paid for sitting in warehouses in Kinshasa, or it's oxygen delivery machines sitting in ports that have already been paid for that have nobody to distribute them and set them up, it's not just the fact of the cuts, it's the manner of them. I think that's important to understand.
And I lost my train of thought right there. 1 second.
That's all right. We're in it together.
Oh yeah. So there has been a lot of TB advocacy in the last couple of years that has gotten a lot of attention. Groups like Stop TB, who want to do things like, get Danaher to provide TB test cartridges at a lower cost, so that, countries can actually afford to use them and diagnose drug-resistant TB quicker. There, is the situation of Johnson & Johnson trying to extend the patent on bedaquiline. And you have been very vocal and gotten your fantastic community to speak up to kind of make things more equitable when it comes to access to TB diagnostics or these life-saving treatments. So I just want to know, are we in the era of ethical bullying?
Yeah, a little bit. Is there like a table of TB fighters in the back? Can you raise your hand if you're there? I think there is. There might be anyway. But you should go to tbfighters.org regardless and learn more about what the TB fighters are up to, because it's really important. Ethical bullying is an interesting phrase. I want to be careful about it because I think that the people who work at pharmaceutical companies are good people who are trying to expand access to create life-saving drugs and expand access to them. It's just that they work within a system that really prioritizes the development of drugs that are very profitable. And we don't have a good system for making TB drugs, especially new lines of antibiotics that we hopefully won't use that often. We don't have a very good system for making those drugs profitable except charging a gajillion dollars for them, which of course poor countries can't afford. And so there's something, the forces of the market run into the needs of human health in ways that we should choose human health. And sometimes I worry we choose the market. And one way we can pressure those companies to choose human health is by saying there are consequences to choosing the market. And those consequences might be that you have a lower, people have a lower public opinion of your company. Those consequences might be that people don't want to order your baby powder as much. And one thing that is really special about this community is that so many people in this room were really part of telling those folks this is unacceptable, and as a result, Danaher did lower the price of their test cartridges. Now, I think they could have lowered them more, but they did lower them, and 2 million more tests are available as a result of that every year, which is game-changing.
I mean, it's a very kind and diplomatic answer.
Thank you.
That you gave there.
I tried.
I agree. It's hard. I feel like I find myself often, doing science communication to the public at large that doesn't have experience with the CDC, being mad about CDC guidance or something, and you have to remind people, like, there are amazing scientists who work at the CDC who are probably
I'm allowed
here.
to be mad at the CDC and love the CDC, just like you can be mad at your spouse and love your spouse, right? Like, you should be able to get into an argument with someone you love and need and resolve the argument without saying, like, I don't love you anymore, right? So we need to begin there. We need to begin with, like, I love you, SAID, but sometimes I disagree with them. And I worry we don't do that sometimes because we get kind of annoyed. Or we forget to say I love you. Well, this is not just true of the CDC, by the way. Sometimes we forget to say I love you to the people we love. It's really important. It's an underrated thing, especially like non-romantic love, like saying I love you to your friends and family, like we do on Esther Day in our community, is really important.
But I mean, I do wonder, you talk about how it's hard because there is not a good system for, incentivizing this creation. Is there a concern that, we have people speak up in public and say this is unacceptable, that the reaction would just be that companies just don't do anything for TB because they don't want the heat?
Yeah, hence me saying how much I love Johnson & Johnson.
We love you, Johnson & Johnson.
I do, and
Please keep doing it.
I really appreciate. I genuinely appreciate that they abandoned their secondary patents on bedaquiline, and I think it shows that they're a company that lives by their values in a really profound way. And I think we should celebrate that when we see it. Now, will I have future disagreements with Johnson & Johnson? Probably, but I think you make a good point. That is something that I worry about, and that's why I shied away from the phrase ethical bullying a little bit.
That's okay. That was my phrase. You can put that one on me.
Yeah. But no, but at the same time, I think look, like, we have to reform the systems while working within the systems. Like, you have to work within the system because people have needs now, but you also have to reform the system. And we started to see, past tense, some of those reforms with, more public money going into developing drugs like bedaquiline. I mean, bedaquiline was funded primarily by public money, primarily by money from the U.S. government. And that is a game-changing drug. That is the reason you were able to hear Henry Ryder speak to you today, is because he lived because of that drug.
Yeah, Henry's story is really incredible to read, and I can only imagine what it must have been like to, maintain this relationship and this contact with him, because you write about him, coming, I mean, it's not a spoiler because you just talked to him on the phone, so we know he's okay, but that he came very close to death from having extremely drug-resistant TB, and it's like a very emotional. What was that like for you, being so far away and like seeing that or hearing about that and like not necessarily being able to do stuff?
Well, Henry was essentially on his deathbed. I mean, that's the reality. His roommate at LaCa died, and he probably would have died if he hadn't had so much support from his mom. And he had an extraordinary doctor who just didn't give up, like Dr. Jérôme Tefera, an Ethiopian doctor who came all the way to Sierra Leone because he saw the size of the crisis there. We all have met these doctors who are, Paul Farmer gets a lot of credit, and I love Paul so much, and I miss Paul so much, but there are so many doctors like Paul Farmer in the Global South who you don't hear about, who aren't famous, who are just uncommonly committed to their patients, and Dr. Tefera is one such person. And he just kept pressuring Partners in Health, kept pressuring the Sierra Leonean Ministry of Health to make to let this kid have the kind of tailored, personalized care that you or I would expect and that everyone deserves. And eventually, he won that fight. And what he said to me was, I know it's just one kid, but what if he can be the first of many? And he has been the first of many. Now, there are many patients at LaCa who get the kind of treatment that Henry gets, and as a result, survive their tuberculosis. LaCa is a very different place than when I first visited there in 2019. Today, it's a dignified place to receive care. That mango tree is still there, but it's not the only tree on the campus. It's become a much more beautiful, dignified place, and they have electricity, they have running water, they have the basics. Now, it's still utterly inadequate to the size of the problem of tuberculosis in Sierra Leone, but it is a very different place from what it was 6 years ago, which is a reminder that progress is possible. And I know right now, for many of us, including me, it feels like progress is not possible and that we're inevitably in a moment of regression. And in many important ways, we are. But Lekha reminds me that that's optional, that, you know, humans make choices together, and that's the world we end up sharing.
So how do we fix it? Just kidding.
With money. With money.
With money, it's true.
I mean, that really, like, it's such an uncomplicated answer, but, like, we have the plan. We know how to eliminate tuberculosis, right? We reduced tuberculosis by 99% in the United States, and we know how we did it. We did it with comprehensive care. We sent these big buses that looked like Winnebagos out into communities that had chest x-ray machines inside of them, and we offered people, get this, free health care, free chest x-rays, and then they would go in, they would get their free chest x-ray, and if they had tuberculosis, they would get treatment for free, because we want to live in a world without tuberculosis. And now we can offer preventative care to the close contacts of people who live with tuberculosis. And so tuberculosis has really, like, we know how to end chains of infection, and if you do that at scale, you end tuberculosis.
Yeah, and I believe last year, and someone will definitely correct me if I'm wrong, because we have a lot of very smart people in this crowd, but last year on World TB Day, Stop TB was advocating for, I think, $250 billion over 7 years as part of TB elimination.
$25 billion over 10 years would also work.
Yeah, but I mean, people think it sounds like a huge number, but we did $100 billion for COVID in 18 months. So it's there, it exists.
Yeah, it exists, and it is possible. It feels like a distant dream right now, but it is possible to live in a world without tuberculosis, and I believe someday we will live in that world, but yeah, it feels further away than it did a couple months ago. I will say that, you know, strides are being made in important ways in important places, and a lot of those strides, like, there's this awesome, in Lesotho, there's this awesome app called TB Hunters that sort of is an app that's used to provide comprehensive care. And I find stuff like that so encouraging. We have, you know, chest x-rays that can be read at scale now with AI working with radiologists, and there's a lot that can be done that we couldn't do even 5 years ago. The tools are getting better, and they will continue to get better as long as we invest in them.
Yeah. I'm also really interested, and this is, how do I put this? This could come off wrong. It feels like maybe you did a little bait and switch to get everybody into the book, or to get people who are not familiar with you into the book. Because I follow your TikTok, and so much of it was like, oh, here's a fun fact about TB, cowboy hats, New Mexico. And then you read the book, and then you're crying.
Yeah. It's a classic trick, Laurel. You trick people into thinking they're going to get a book about, hey, did you know tuberculosis is the reason we have the cowboy hat? And it is. And that is very interesting. The hat maker John B. Stetson got tuberculosis, headed out west, and discovered that the hats out there sucked, and he decided to invent the cowboy hat, and that's the reason we have the Stetson. And that's also the reason we have Stetson University, where my friend Nate went to school. So, John B. Stetson, any billionaires in the audience, email me, but John B. Stetson was a billionaire by today's standards, and gave all of his money away. He gave all his money to found universities and other cool stuff, and food pantries and stuff.
Yay, give your money away. Give it to us. We'll cure TB.
Give it to Laurel. She knows what to do with it.
I'll figure it out. I'll get it to the right people. You can trust me. Okay, I mean, so just this, you know, your book, I very much respect how much it is about caring about TB now and the people that it affects now. But, you know, people want to know how it affects them. And I'm just interested, as someone who does so much science communication currently, I unfortunately have developed a brain to think like a wellness influencer or like a conspiracy theorist. You know, if TB were to theoretically make a comeback in the United States, do you have thoughts about how that would be spun to be a good thing, actually?
No, I don't. the world is safer with TB, more drug-resistant TB in the U.S., I'm sure that somebody would spin it. Well, it's been a little. I mean, I don't want to alienate my audience here, but it's been a little frustrating to see some wellness trends kind of collide with the history of tuberculosis. So a huge part of the TB crisis in America was from bovine TB. Which you got mostly from drinking raw milk, sometimes from, I guess, like if you directly played with the cow's udders, you could also get it, but mostly it was from drinking raw milk. I don't know why I said that. I'd like to take that back. We're in a holy place. I'd like to begin with a new answer to the question. But bovine TB is still a huge problem around the world, and it can attack the intestines, it can attack the bones. I write in the book about one young woman who went to a sanatorium when she was 3 years old and lived there until she was 16, which was very common. And the only reason she left the sanatorium when she was 16 is that she happened to be born in the moment when antibiotics became available, or happened to come of age when antibiotics became available. And so she was eventually cured of her TB. But the pain of bone-involved TB is unbelievable. In fact, when I was in Philadelphia a couple days ago, or maybe yesterday, I don't remember, but when I was in Philadelphia, we heard from a young woman who'd been finally belatedly diagnosed with tuberculosis of the bone. And that's an incredibly painful condition and can be very disabling and ultimately fatal. And so that's something that's still very much with us.
I knew you were going to talk about raw milk and TB. If I brought that question up, I tricked you into doing it.
So now you're baiting and switching me.
Mm-hmm. But it's for good, because anyone who listens to the show knows that I absolutely hate raw milk. So any opportunity to get anyone...
I don't like milk in general. It really bugs me. I'll tell you, and this is really going to alienate my audience. We're the only mammal that drinks the milk of another mammal. It's weird. Freaks me out. Just freaks me out. Every time somebody's like, would you like a glass of milk? I'm like, yikes. I don't think that's for me.
Also, if you want to get more freaked out, if you know anybody who likes to go deer hunting, particularly in places like Michigan, a lot of TB in the deer population.
Yeah, there's a lot of TB in deer.
You make sure they're...
Don't drink deer milk.
Yeah. Get those deer tested so that we can do deer tuberculosis surveillance, which is a thing that we have to do.
Yeah, we check it out.
So you're like, this is show 7 or so on your tour, your marathon tour?
That is correct, yeah.
Has anybody asked you a question that you found particularly fun that you would like an opportunity to answer again in front of this audience?
Somebody asked me if I could connect TB to Taylor Swift.
Ooh.
And that was a fun one. I mean, TB is connected to everything. Somebody asked me if I could connect TB to the Indy 500, and I was like, amateur hour. The winner of the 1931 Indy 500, Louis Schneider, died of tuberculosis 4 years later. Everybody knows that. But Taylor Swift is a really interesting one because, of course, in that song, The Lakes, and I'm going to butcher the line, I apologize, and I know you don't want to piss off Swifties, but in that song, The Lakes, she says, take me to the lakes where the poets go to die. And the poets went to die because they went to the Lake District to try to survive their TB. That's what they died of. That's where they died and what they died of. The lakes where the poets go to die is the Lake District in England, where like John Keats and Percy Shelley went. Did you know that? And this isn't in the book, but when John Keats was dying of tuberculosis, Percy Shelley wrote him a letter, and he was like, "Man, it's a bummer." I'm paraphrasing. He was like, "Man, it's a bummer you have consumption, but it does tend to strike people who write great verses as you have done." And Percy Shelley also had consumption and knew that he did. And so he was also saying like, and I have done.
Yeah, you want to give me a compliment back?
Exactly, yeah. Right. Like, it's such a, what a Percy Shelley thing to write, Like, it's incredible. Incredible.
Also, Adirondack chairs.
Adirondack chairs.
TB.
I think that's in a footnote in my book because I couldn't squeeze it in, but I wanted to.
Yeah, TB
is everywhere.
Yeah,
everything is tuberculosis.
TB, pretty much. Yeah, I also think that sanatoriums would make a comeback. They're kind of already there. Wellness retreats.
Yeah,
That's
but the
modern...
sanatorium was a huge bummer. I mean, you do not want to, well, you don't want to go to a sanatorium now because they're all empty because we devoted, so that's the other thing, sorry, about devoting resources to tuberculosis, right? Is that like we used to spend an unfathomable amount of money on tuberculosis in the United States. At the height of the TB crisis in the US, there were almost as many hospital beds just for TB patients as there were hospital beds for everything else combined. And so we used to spend so much money on tuberculosis, and now we spend much, much less because we saw tuberculosis decline by 99%. And so it's a great investment. Like, I don't mean to be making cost-benefit analyses, but like, it's a great investment. Anyway, what were you saying?
No, it's true. It's what for every $1 you invest in TB, you get $40 back.
At least. Some people say 59.
Whoa.
Yeah. Depends on which article in the Journal of Cost-Benefit Analysis you read. Which is I read those two articles, and then I started reading other articles in the Journal of Cost-Benefit Analysis because I was like, these were pretty good. And then they're like, dude, it's not just about medicine. All kinds of things have a cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, I mean, health economists, get a bad rap sometimes, but that's a good one.
Yeah.
It's $1 to $40.
I'll take that.
Yeah, I'll take that. What else we got? TV.
Oh, what else do I have about Taylor Swift? Can we transition to the audience questions?
We want to do that?
Well, you tell me.
Yeah, I mean, we can do that.
All right, let's do it.
That sounds good. All right, hang on. Let me get them.
Are you going to get them out? Oh, yeah. Thanks for writing all your note cards, everybody. That was very sweet of you.
All right. Question 1. What is your favorite thing that you have been mistaken for Hank for?
Oh, I mean, my favorite one, I can't name the famous person, but a famous person said to me, a really famous person, like, I can't name them, but they said to me, what I like so much about your work is your range, like you're able to make crash course videos on biology and history. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, and you write like both like fiction for teenagers and science fiction. And I was like, yes, I do. But also one time I was walking in Pittsburgh at night, and somebody was drunk at a bus stop, and they pointed at me, and I won't repeat exactly what they said because we're in a church. But they said, Hank Green, buddy. But they didn't say buddy. And I was like, yes. And they said, they said, I love your Tom Scott videos. And I was like, I think Tom Scott makes those. So that was another one that really stuck out for me. I was like, in addition to not being Tom Scott, I'm also not Hank Green.
I would imagine you probably also get a lot of scenarios where they are, in fact, talking about you, but calling you Hank.
That happens all the time, and then they feel so bad. They'll be like, oh, no, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, we are basically the same person. Like, it doesn't bother me at all. Like, somebody will be like, are you Hank Green? And I go between saying, like, yes, and just, kind of easing the discomfort, and saying, no, I'm the other one. And sometimes I say, no, I'm the other one, and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, I don't mind at all being mistaken for Hank Green. He's lovely. He's a wonderful person. He does so much good. I'm just the tail to his little comet. Like, I love being his big brother, so don't feel bad at all. But then sometimes I just say yes to try to get it over with. But then it can get awkward if they want like specifics, like if they start asking me questions that I don't necessarily know the answer to because I'm not Hank Green.
Yeah. I got on a plane the other day and the flight attendant said, didn't you just come from New York? And I said, no, that's another woman with bangs.
Yes. Could be my spouse, honestly. My spouse also has bangs and dark hair.
I mean, go to Trader Joe's. There's millions of us. All right, next question. Any word from Potato while you're on your book tour? This is from Maggie.
Okay, I should explain something because there's a lot of infectious disease doctors in the room. it occurs to me, who are probably like, what the heck is going on? This is weird. If this man says it's weird to sneeze, everyone makes a noise. It's weird. It's a weird situation that we're in. So there's some people in this room who like have followed my brother and I's videos for like over 10 years, or at least like 5 years. And there's all kinds of inside jokes and lots of stuff. And I have a dog, and his name is Potato, and that's one of the inside jokes. I call him Potato partly because of tuberculosis.
Because he's tubercle-shaped?
He's tubercle-shaped. So the word potato, potatoes are tubers, as you're probably aware. And the word tuber also describes the tubercles that the clumps of white blood cells that surround tuberculosis bacteria and kind of keep it in check so that people have latent TB instead of active TB. And when we were naming Potato, we named him Potato partly because the lady we got him from said, look at him, he's just little potato. She speaks Russian as her first, or I don't want to get this wrong. I think she speaks Croatian as her first language. And she said, look at him, he's just little potato. You touch his ears, potato. You touch his feet, potato. And the kids were like, what if we named him Potato? And I was like, perfect, it's tubercular. So anyway, I have a dog. That's a long backstory for my dog, but I have a dog, and the infectious disease doctors in this room are extremely welcome to join this community. Don't feel excluded, feel welcomed. Feel like this is your first day as a nerd fighter, and I know... Because we need more infectious disease doctors in Nerd Fight area. We kind of over-index on teachers and librarians. We're a little under-indexed on infectious disease docs. Hopefully that's changing as I tour the country, though. Hopefully some of them will become Vlogbrothers subscribers and subscribers to Henry Ryder's YouTube channel. Don't forget that when you get home. He's trying to get to 100,000. But yeah, Potato's doing good, man. He's fine. He's not a very good dog, but that's not his fault. That's our fault, right? Like, there's no bad dogs, only bad owners. And so whenever Potato's bad, I'm like, God, I'm a bad owner. He's a great dog. He's very sweet. He loves me and he loves the kids. He just he doesn't know how to not pee in the house. He loves to pee in the house, you know? And who can blame him? That's where I usually pee.
All right. Where is the coolest place you've traveled to while researching this book?
Oh, Atlanta, by a wide margin. Just pandering, blatant pandering to an audience.
I respect it.
No, I mean, it was really cool. I mean, every time I go to Sierra Leone, I love it. I mean, you know, you fall in love with places and with people, right? Like, places are made out of people in the end. And so I've very much fallen in love with Sierra Leone, and I love being there. I'll be there later this year for when the construction officially finishes for the Maternal Center of Excellence, this hospital. So many people in this room are responsible for that hospital existing through donating to Partners in Health or through buying Hank's ridiculous socks that I'm wearing right now. And so thank you so much. That hospital is going to complete construction in October and open to patients in January, and it's going to be a game changer for the Kono region. Finally, a place to have safe emergency C-sections, finally a NICU, finally an opportunity for people to give birth in a safe environment. It's really amazing, and I'm super, super proud of it. So I'll be going back to Sierra Leone later this year, which I'm really excited about, but that's my favorite place to go.
Yeah. Adam Youngblood?
Hey,
Do I
Adam.
have your permission to read your question the way I imagined it when I started reading it? Thank you. Okay.
Is this going to be a performance?
A little bit. Just because it's so long. My name is Adam, and I teach AP Environmental Science. I'd like to propose to you the same hypothetical question I ask my students when we learn about infectious disease.
Ooh, thank you for teaching infectious disease in your environmental science class.
I will give you the power to snap your fingers and eradicate one disease of your choice.
Oh.
Would you choose a disease like TB that's curable but we are struggling to eradicate, or one we are much further from solving?
Well, this is brutal. It's brutal, Adam. I mean, obviously I'd like to eradicate TB. I spent the last 5 years thinking about it, and it would be really fun to publish a book called Everything Was Tuberculosis. That would be really exciting for me. And hopefully someday
That's the sequel.
Hopefully I will live to change the title. But if not, hopefully my children will. That said, I would not eliminate TB because we already can eliminate TB. I would eliminate something that we can't currently eliminate. And I think I would eliminate, now this is cheating, full disclosure, because the disease I'm going to eliminate is not just one disease, it's tens of thousands of diseases, but we call it one disease, and I would eliminate cancer. Cancer is also a disease of injustice. Cancer is a disease, I mean, in Sierra Leone, one of the first things, my brother had cancer a couple years ago, and when he had cancer, one of the first things he said to me was, if you get Hodgkin lymphoma in the United States, you have a 93% chance of being cured. And if you get Hodgkin lymphoma and you can't access treatment, you have a 5% chance of being cured. And we later learned the story of a boy in Sierra Leone named Monday who his parents brought him into an Ebola treatment facility during the height of the Ebola outbreak, and he had ruptured lymph nodes, you know, that had ruptured outside of his skin like Henry did when he was really sick with tuberculosis. And he was just tremendously ill, and he'd had Hodgkin lymphoma for years and never been able to access treatment. And thanks to Partners in Health, he was able to get to Rwanda and get the kind of cancer care that he needed, and now he's alive and well. But for the vast majority of people like Monday, the story doesn't end well. They end up dying of their cancer, and death from cancer without access to morphine or any kind of painkiller is just unbelievably horrible way to die. And so I would eliminate cancer because it affects so many people around the world, and because it is also a disease of injustice.
Great. Well, those are my questions. Those are my audience questions.
Well, Laurel, what a joy it has been to be in your company.
Oh my God, thank you so much, Hank. This has been delightful.
So we're nearing the end of our time together tonight, but I don't blame you if you feel like we're also nearing the end of our time together, like in a more general sense. That is to say, you may feel, as I sometimes do of late, that the world is a bit falling apart and maybe ending. Societal collapse is in the air, noted theologian Timothy Chalamet recently said. It's true. He said that. He said societal collapse is in the air. What a beautiful man. What a gifted thinker. We do know the world will end after all, and this is the preaching portion of the program. A while back, my then 9-year-old daughter found out that in about 1.5 billion years, the sun will become a red giant and will engulf the earth. And when Alice found that out, it was a real bummer of a day in the Green household. So yeah, I know it's going to end. It will end for each of us, for all of us, for our planet. But not yet. Not today. As I mentioned earlier, my friend Henry loves the verbs encourage and discourage. And right now, I am very discouraged. I feel that my courage is being dragged down by all sorts of forces, especially by those who argue or act as if some human lives are more valuable than others. How can we respond hopefully to a moment where hope does not feel rewarded or justified? How can we imagine better worlds when so many power structures seem intent upon making worse ones? I mean, one recent estimate holds that cutting off all U.S.-related tuberculosis funding will result in a 30% increase in drug-resistant tuberculosis. And that's just one disease among many, and declining human health is just one issue among many. And so it's easy to feel that this is the end of the history. and I don't blame you if you feel it. There's a dread about our historical moment, a general feeling that horror is here and worse is coming. And I feel that too. I mean, why are we even here? Just to witness suffering? Just to worry? I know sometimes it feels that way. But I think while we are in this moment of not yet, we are here to be with each other in the deepest sense, to help others feel less alone and to allow others to help us feel less alone. I believe we are here to accompany each other through the joys and travails of humanness, through the wonder and the precarity. We do not live at the end of history. We live in the middle of history. I argue in this book that we are the products of history, but we are also ourselves historical forces. And together, we can change the arc of our shared story. I know that because I have seen it happen. The year I graduated from high school, 12 million children died under the age of 5, and last year fewer than 5 million did. That progress wasn't natural or inevitable. It happened because millions of people, hundreds of millions or even billions if you include all the taxpayers who contributed to it, are working together to make the world safer for children. And that is my hope. I know today feels like the last day, the end of the story, because it's the last one we've lived through so far. But today is not the end of the story. Today is the middle of the story, and it falls to us to make a better end. My friend Amy Cross Rosenthal, who died of cancer a few years ago, knew this better than anyone I've ever met. Amy used to ask people to sing an old song from World War I, sung to the tune of that New Year's Eve song, Auld Lang Syne. British soldiers in the trenches, horrified by the pointlessness of war, would sing, "We're here because we're here because we're here." And Amy changed the meaning of that song without ever changing the words. She turned it into a battle cry for hope. It's true that we can't say with certainty why we are here, but we can nonetheless celebrate being here, especially in community, because that song, when sung together, takes on an entirely different meaning, at least for me. And so if you'll indulge me, I'd like to invite Laurel back out so that we can sing it together with all of you once now. We're here because we're here, because we're here, because we're here. We're here because we're here, because we're here, because we're here. Thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. Thank you. Thank you so much.